Hi, Laurie Green Westlake again, and this is part 2 of the story of John and Mary, two young lovers from the biblical times that portray Jesus and the bride of Christ. So, on with this story. We left off where John's father had told him it was time for him to select a bride and that he was ready to pay for a bride. And John has just told his father that the girl that he really would like to have is going to be a high price. And so John's father says to him, "Who is this young lady?" And John says, "Oh, it's Mary of the Leibowitz family. He's a shopkeeper in town." And John's father says, I know this man well. He's a good man, and he's a beautiful daughter. It's a good family. John says, "Yes, Father, but she is an only child. She is the one and only daughter, and I'm sure she will be expensive before anything we can afford, for you've already bought 3 brides for my brothers." And John's father says, "Let us go and negotiate and see what her father says." So the next morning, with some excitement in his heart, John wakes up and says, "I'm going to speak to the Leibowitz family today about Mary," having a glimmer of hope that maybe somehow this would miraculously work out and Mary could be his bride. So he makes it to town. He goes through the city streets, which are dirt and cobblestone, and he comes to this small shop, and it's the Leibowitz shop. They sell dry goods. And John knocks on the door, enters the shop, the bell rings, and Mary's father's sitting back at a desk at the back of the shop. And John sees him and says, "Sir." Well, Mary's father is like, "Hey, here's that boy, that John. His dad has cattle and he's paid for a lot of brides. There's no way he can afford my daughter." Because you see, Mary has come of marrying age. And her father thinks to himself, "I have been talking to the widower down the street, and he has money, and he will pay a large price for my daughter. I'm not going to mess with this young whippersnapper, John." But John approaches and says, "Sir, I have come to inquire of your daughter for her hand in marriage." And Mary's father says, "Son, there is no way you can afford my daughter Mary. She is 10,000 shekels and 25 head of cattle, more than you have, more than you would ever be able to afford. I am promised her to the widower down the street." And John says, "Oh, has the covenant been signed, sir?" "Not yet, but it will." John leaves the shop just heartbroken. He shouldn't have even come because he knew this girl was going to be too much. And now he's embarrassed himself, possibly embarrassed his father by even pretending to afford her. And most of all, he got his hopes up the night before. So now he walks back, slowly back to his father's house. And there at the end of the drive, the walkway with their house down in the valley, he sees his father waiting. His father's saying, Come, John, tell me, what of your bride? What of your bride?" And John says, "Father, I hate to even tell you because I can't ask. I don't have it within me to ask for this girl. She would take all that you have, all that I have, everything. She would be the most expensive bride you've ever paid for." And his father says, "Tell me, son, what has her father demanded?" And John said, "Oh, shekels beyond what we have, cattle beyond what we have, and it's not possible." And John's father says, "Son, all things are possible." And he pulls a sheet of paper out of his pocket, and it's a covenant, it's an agreement that these two, the moment it's signed, are promised to each other forever. It's really their marriage license activated. And John's father takes out a pen and he signs the covenant and says, "John, go get your bride." Oh, the next morning, John gets all dressed up And he runs back to the village and he slides in front of the Levelwood store, opens the door and says, "Sir, I have brought your price. Sign this covenant before the widower does." And Mary's dad looks at John. He can't believe it. He can't believe that he has met the price. And he thinks to himself, what is it who she marries as long as we get the price? And he takes the covenant and he signs it. Now, Mary and John, without ever standing before a priest, without ever saying "I do," are now married based on a covenant between John's father and Mary's father. So, as it was the custom, John would come to an engagement banquet, which is where Mary would have the opportunity to exercise her will in this upcoming ceremony. They're already married. So in this engagement ceremony, John goes home and he comes back on an evening to the engagement ceremony. And at the ceremony, he arrives, and Mary's mother opens the door to John, invites him into the home, invites him to a table. There's a table in front of me. I'm looking at it as if it's loaded down with a banquet. And John is seated, and in comes Mary, beautiful, lovely, the desire of his heart, Mary. And their eyes meet. And there is such excitement there. John knows she wants this. But anyway, Mary's dad takes a seat at the head of the table. And he puts John on his left and Mary on his right. And he takes a cup. I've got a glass here, a glass of water, but it's a wine cup that he takes. And he takes a carafe of wine and he pours it into the cup. And this cup is significant, or represents rather, John's life. This is where we get the saying that your cup is half full or your cup is half empty. The cup represents all that John is: his job, his finances, where he lives. And then when the wine is poured into the cup, the wine is significant of his spiritual life, his standing before God, his eternal standing, the coming resurrection. So when Mary's dad pours the wine into the cup, he's pretty much saying, this is John's life. This is John's cup, and his eternity are in this cup. And Mary's father would hand the cup to John. And John, I'm John, and he would take the cup, saying, this is my cup, this is my life, I drink of it. Then he would slide that cup across the table to Mary. Now, if Mary was unhappy with this situation, she would just let the cup sit there and let everyone at the table know, I'm not very happy about this. Not that it would have changed anything, but it could have. They could have divorced at that point. But in this story, Mary is very excited, and she picks up the cup. And now I'm Mary, and she picks up and she drinks of it. And that's Mary saying, I take John's cup. Okay, for time-wise, I'm going to stop there, and we're going to go on to part 3. I'm so sorry to split this up, but it makes it so much easier to upload. So stay tuned, look up all those wonderful scriptures, and go to part 3.